And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101 on a Monday evening, the first day of the work week, and we are starting off today uh, with uh, our continuing discussion. I'd like to welcome all of you wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Toronto, Canada, from the United States, New Jersey, New York, Washington, D.C., down there in the South, and those of you who are in the Midwest or the West Coast, welcome to Politics 101, our sisters and brothers in the Caribbean, and we see in Guyanese all over the Caribbean, the CPL moving from St. Kitts and Antigua, St. Lucia, Barbados, and seeing Guyanese turning out to support their teams. And, at the Kensington Oval in Barbados a couple of nights ago, and it seems as though there were more Guyanese in the stadium than Bajans. Testimony to our people just keep moving on and trying to make it wherever they are, wherever you are in the Caribbean, our Caribbean. Welcome to tonight's edition of Politics 101. And of course, you're joining us from inside Guyana. Welcome to all of you from Berbice, Demerara, Essequibo, whether you're in the hinterland or you're on the coast. Welcome to Politics 101. We're going to have an abbreviated program tonight because I have to skip over to a special program on GlobeSpan. They're doing an interview with me in my capacity as the WPA representatives, and so I will have to skip over there. But I want us to spend the little time we have tonight talking about something that was raised by my friend Christopher Ram, who was scathing in his criticism of the opposition political parties for being silent on the renewal of the oil contract. And I think it's a very important point that he has raised, and it needs some response. He took the PNC to task, the WPA, the AFC in particular, for being silent on the oil contract, and he think it's in many regards our silence, according to him, is compromising our country's sovereignty. I welcome criticism of political parties. They ought to be criticized. And in that regard, I welcome Mr. Ram's intervention. But I do have a couple of things that I think Mr. Ram may want to consider. He was critical of the WPA for, according to him, spending time on how to distribute crumbs rather than to fight for more. And I think that's where Chris has found himself in some tangle. The oil contract, of course, is very important. It's a lopsided contract. And we all agree with that. My own view on the lopsidedness of the contract has to do with the fact that when you're coming up against Exxon, when you're coming up against Exxon and you are a country, Guyana, never didn't have a track record of negotiating an oil contract, um, you are starting at that table at a disadvantage. You're talking Exxon, whose budget is bigger than many countries in the world, and here is Guyana going to negotiate a contract with Exxon. You're starting at a disadvantage. You have very little leverage to play. My own view is that the biggest leverage Guyana had at the time was if it could have put together a national team, that is a team that involves all the political parties and non-state actors with expertise in oil. That is, if we had gone to the table as a united country through our representatives, we would have been in a slightly better position to negotiate a better contract. Outside of that, I can't see how we could have negotiated a contract better, much better than the one that they eventually negotiate. So I do not subscribe to the view of beating up on the people who signed the contract as being somewhat stupid and so on. No, I think Guyana sitting at the table with Exxon, you talk about a mismatch. Guyana did not have leverage. The only leverage we had was that the oil belonged to us. But apart from that, we had no leverage to take to the table. And so therefore, to expect us to come away from that table with a good contract, a very good contract, I think it's stretching the imagination a little bit. Could the contract have been a little better? Yes, I think so. And I think had we gone there, at the coalition government at the time called the PPP to the table and call all its partners to the table, call members of civil society to the table and said, look, we are going to sign the contract of our lives and we would like to go there as a united team. I think that would have put us in a little bit of a better position to get a little bit more. I don't think that we would have gotten a lot more, but we would have gotten a little more. And I think that was where the error occurred. But the principle here that I am adumbrating is that to expect Guyana, which at that time was the second poorest country in the hemisphere, to expect Guyana to have gone to that table and to get a halfway decent contract is expecting too much. It really was expecting too much. You know, I see comparisons are made with other countries. Other countries, Brazil was able to get this and so on, and some of the other countries were able to get that. Each country has its own circumstance, its own circumstances. And so therefore are able to, each country is going to be able to negotiate a better contract. When you look at Guyana, a divided nation going to negotiate a contract, very poor country, sitting next door to Venezuela, who has been aggressive in terms of our national sovereignty, I think was expecting too much. And I reiterate that the only way I thought that we could have gotten a little bit more if we'd gone there as a united country of all the parties. Now, my party, the WPA, was part of the coalition. We were not consulted. We were not part of the team. We were not consulted. We were not asked our views. We have in our ranks Professor Clive Thomas, who has been writing on oil, who is an expert on oil. He was not part of the team that went. He was not consulted on oil and gas. So I think that's where the error occurred, is that the coalition government did not consult all of its partners. It did not consult the wider society, did not consult the main opposition and try to bring them in. Right? So I will admit that an error was made there. So having said that, I now get to Chris's main point. And that is that the opposition has been generally silent on the oil contract. Now, let's be frank here. Right? The chances of getting a renewed contract compared with the chances of getting a more democratic distribution of the little, what Chris is calling the crumbs. The chances of getting the crumbs distributed democratically, justly, and fairly are higher than getting a renewed contract from Exxon. And so when a party like the WPA doesn't spend its energy calling for a renewed contract, but spending time on what we get and making sure that that is distributed democratically, we are being realistic and we are being pragmatic at the same time. Now, you call for renewal of the contract. How do you enforce this renewal of the contract that you're calling for? How do you enforce it? How do you enforce calling for this new contract? That is the question I'm asking. Now, is it correct to call for a new contract? Yes. Yes. All contracts are subject to renewal. And nothing is wrong in calling for a new contract and advocating for a new contract. But to pit that against taking what we get and distributing it democratically, I think it's an error that Chris is making. Now, for the first half of this year, we are learning that the government raked in almost $2 billion in oil revenue. That's not crumbs, Christopher Ram. That's not crumbs. From a Guyana standpoint, that's not crumbs. It's crumbs for Exxon, which is a big company and makes a lot of money in oil and gas. But pulling in close to $2 billion in the first 6 months of this year in oil revenue, it's not crumbs. The oil sector grew by 48.7% according to the government. That's not crumbs. That's not crumbs, Mr. Ram. That's a lot of money when compared with what we had before that contract. And so when we put more of our attention to distributing fairly, justly, and democratically what we have, we are advancing the principle of equality and equitability. That's a very important principle. Mr. Ram is saying that when we are quiet on the contract, we are compromising our sovereignty. And we are selling our sovereignty out. And in principle, he's correct. But there's another sovereignty. And that is the sovereignty of the people. The sovereignty of the people. There's the sovereignty as far as our national integrity is concerned, and Ram is right about that. If Exxon is getting the hog of what of what we are producing, then in many regards our sovereignty is compromised. What I will put to Mr. Ram is that our sovereignty has always been compromised. Independence did not give us full control over our sovereignty. We continued after independence to be pawns. Remember, we in Guyana and English-speaking Caribbean got our independence, Trinidad and Jamaica in 62, Guyana and Barbados in 66, in a world that was not created for us. The New World Order that was created after the Second World War at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the Washington Consensus, was a world that was created for the big countries, the so-called victors of the Second World War. They created a world for them. And when we came into that world, we had no control over that world. Our sovereignty continued to the point where some people said all we had at independence was flag and anthem and a constitution. Beyond that, nothing much has changed. Kwame Nkrumah and others refer to it as neocolonialism and new colonialism. So this sovereignty that Chris Ram is talking about is probably in his head. And it's to some extent theoretical, because in a real practical way, our sovereignty has never been uncompromised. Our sovereignty has always been compromised. So when Ram talks about what Exxon is doing no different from what Bokors continued to do after independence, from what Alcan continued to do after independence. And even when we nationalized those companies, we start to depend on them to help us with marketing our bauxite and our sugar and so on. Post-plantation societies like ours, our sovereignty is always compromised. So when Christopher Ram talks about this lopsided contract compromising our sovereignty, he's correct, only that is nothing new. It is nothing new. But as I'm arguing, Chris Ram ignores another form of sovereignty, and that is the sovereignty of the people. The right of the people to benefit equally and equitably and justly from whatever is coming in. So when the opposition, in particular we in the Working People's Alliance, take the position that it is better to put more energies in ensuring that the government distributes fairly and justly and democratically what we have, we are moving from that other sovereignty, and that is the sovereignty of the people. The right of the people to enjoy whatever is coming into the country. And as I continue to say, that the money that we have been getting is not crumbs. It's not crumbs. It's a lot of money for a country like Guyana. And Christopher Ram is missing that point. It is not crumbs. And so therefore, to make this argument that what we should be doing is fighting Exxon and not fighting the government of Guyana to distribute whatever is get fairly. You see, the trap Ram and others have found themselves in is that they are fighting Exxon for a new contract. And they are not fighting the government of Guyana for respecting its contract with the people of Guyana. Social contract. Those of you who know political science know about social contract theory. We have a contract with our government. And we in the Working People's Alliance and the other opposition parties are saying that contract between the people and their government is as important as the contract between the government and Exxon. Ram would like us to talk about one contract. That is the contract between the government and Exxon. Fair enough. But it's an equally important contract, and that is the contract between the people and their government, the social contract. And Ram does not want to deal with that social contract. Maybe he's assuming that all is well with that social contract. The government of Guyana is violating that social contract because it's not distributing the wealth that is coming from oil in a democratic manner. Doesn't Ram know that the poverty rate in Guyana is still over 40%? And that if the government respects the social contract and distribute the resources more fairly, more democratically, then poverty would decrease. Ram is not interested in the social contract between the people of Guyana and the government. He lets the government off the hook and wants us to fight Exxon. Wants us to fight Exxon, but don't fight the government of Guyana. Two contracts. The contract between Exxon and the government, and the contract between the people of Guyana and the government. And Ram is not paying attention to one contract. He's paying attention to the other contract. Do we deserve a better contract from Exxon? Yes. 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 Do we deserve a better contract between the people of Guyana and the government? Yes. And so it's not one or the other. And I can speak for my party, our party, the Working People's Alliance. We are saying the chances of getting a better contract between the government and the people is higher than getting a better contract between Exxon and the government. That's one. What Ram is ignoring is that the PNC, the AFC, and the WPA are in no position to negotiate a new contract. If a new contract can be negotiated right now, it has to be the government of Guyana. Ram should be directing his criticism to the government of Guyana, because they are the ones who are in a position now, right now as we speak, as Ram writes. They are the ones who are in a position to negotiate a new contract. Not the PNC or the WPA or the AFC. We are outside of formal power. And so Ram is playing a sleight of hand here. The people who he should be abusing down is the government of Guyana, because they have the power now to negotiate a new contract. And of course, when they were out of office, they said, yes, they will negotiate a contract, renegotiate the contract. They got into power and they haven't done so. And Ram wants to set that trap for the opposition. It's easy for any opposition party to say, when we get into government, we'll renegotiate the contract. And when you get into government, you then change your mind like the PPP did. So Ram is out of order. He's out of order. on 2 counts. On the count of believing that the sovereignty of the people is not important. He's wrong to believe that what we are getting is crumbs. And he's directing his fire the wrong place. Norton can't do nothing about the contract. Nigel Hughes can't do anything about the contract. David Hines can't do anything about the contract. The PPP government can do something about the contract. They can approach Exxon and say, can we negotiate this contract? They have not done so. Send your fire to them, Mr. Ram, not to us. So I just wanted to introduce that subject. I'm going to speak more on it during this week because I think it's a very important question. As I said, we're going to have an abbreviated program tonight because I have to skip over to GlobeSpan to do a one-on-one interview there, starting in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to leave you all a little bit early tonight, and then we'll come back tomorrow night, and then during the course of the week tomorrow night, we're going to have Dr. Jeffrey on tomorrow night, and then I will come back to this question of Christopher Ram and attacking the opposition for being silent on the oil contract. Give you a little something there to tease, and we'll come back to that subject later in the week. See you all tomorrow. And those of you who have the time, you can tune in to GlobeSpan. The program starts in about 2 minutes, and I will be over there on that program. Thank you all very much. See you all tomorrow night.